Okay, my name is Lawrence McGlynn, and you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 Philadelphia on Comcast Channel 66 and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Marco Serino of the Philadelphia Tribune to preview the Philadelphia District Attorney's race. Journalist and Professor Lynn Washington will discuss the 40th anniversary of the MOVE bombing. The Lenfest Institute's Sean Mooring will tell us about their civic engagement survey. And Lance Haver will provide an update on SEPTA. Denise Clay-Murray, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We got a packed show tonight.
Yeah,
so we're going to go
got some
right
stuff.
right to the interview that you did with Lynn Washington.
You're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5. I'm Denise Clay-Murray, and I'm here with Lynn Washington. He is a professor in the Department of Journalism at Temple University, and one of the reporters that is still was one of the reporters that was there when the MOVE confrontation of 1985 happened. We're talking about the 40th anniversary of MOVE, so we thought that probably the best person we could have to come on and talk about that is Lynn. And thank you so much for joining us. I guess my first question for you is, I guess it's been 40 years since all of this happened. As somebody who reported on it, is it still as fresh a memory for you as it was when it happened?
The short answer is yes. It's been 40 years, 40 long years, and I guess I got a few more gray hairs since then. The memory, though, has remained fresh, not only because of the just the outrageous quality of the event itself is something you just don't forget, but over the years, I've done quite a few interviews, so that just keeps things fresh in my mind, as well as, writing about it and doing some creative projects like this six-part podcast that we did through Temple's Logan Center for Urban Investigative Journalism. We took a look at MOVE, and it's unusual in that we looked at MOVE not just within the context, or should I say the confines, of May 13th, 1985, but we took it all the way back from the inception of MOVE as an organization in the early 70s, and actually rolled it back to the birth of the founder of MOVE, a guy named Vincent Liepert, who later became John Africa. So the short answer to your question is yes, it stays fresh in my mind.
So you mentioned the podcast, because when I talk to people who are much younger than me,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of have to go through like a process of explaining MOVE and explaining that while 85 is the confrontation we talk about the most, because let's face it, it's not every day that somebody drops a bomb on a city block in a major American city.
Mm-hmm.
But there were issues prior to that. As someone who is around young people all the time, what do young people know about MOVE and what happened? And I guess, how does the podcast help with that?
Well, the podcast helps in providing explanations for how 1985 started. And one direct line for the causation of 1985 was an incident that happened on August 8th, 1978. That's when there was another shootout between the MOVE organization and police. An officer was killed. As a result of that, 9 MOVE members were sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison, and MOVE's efforts to gain the release of those people is what laid the foundation for 1985. However, 1978 just didn't occur in a vacuum. You have to take it back to March of 1976 when there was a confrontation between members of MOVE and police, not a gun battle, but a physical battle. And during that incident, a MOVE baby was killed. And so from 1976, you could see the radicalization of MOVE and their, I guess, stated determination not to take it anymore. And that led to all these confrontations. So, yeah, there's some background there. Mm. Now, in terms of young people or younger people understanding it, we know that there is a practice in America of disappearing certain events. And most times those events involve Black people. So it's not surprising that people would not understand what happened or even know about 1985. For example, the school system of Philadelphia just started integrating MOVE and the 1985 event into its history curriculum. So generations of students have come through Philadelphia schools without knowing anything about MOVE. And you say, oh, this is unusual. Well, no, not really. Because if we look at another event that took place in May, another bombing event that took place in May, and this one was in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, they disappeared that from the local memory. So I remember seeing a documentary on the events in Tulsa where bigots in a biplane dropped gas bombs on a Black neighborhood during a riot where, white folks went in, racist people went in, and just decimated this very prosperous community. The distinction between Tulsa and Philadelphia is that in Philadelphia, it was authorized police who did the bombing, where in Tulsa, it was freelancers. But getting back to why Tulsa was forgotten, I remember hearing or seeing a documentary, and one of the scenes was a guy who had recently graduated from college, and he was recounting how when he went to college and he was in a class, and the professor was saying, "Well, this, and that happened in Tulsa, and I want to let you know." And this guy stood up and said, "Hey, wait a minute, I'm from Tulsa. I don't know what you're talking about. It never happened." And he was shocked when he found out that something like that happened in his city and he didn't know about it. So it's not surprising that people in Philadelphia wouldn't know what happened in May of 1985.
Now, because this is the 40th anniversary, you're hearing a little bit more chatter about MOVE and what happened in 1985 in places where you wouldn't expect to hear it. Like, for example, at City Council, they passed a resolution, calling for Tuesday, the actual date, May 13th, to be a day of commemoration or a day of reflection about what happened. Did you ever see something like that coming from City Council happening, back then? Because let's face it, the order to drop the bombs came from City Hall.
Yeah, the police commissioner, on his own volition, made a series of despicable decisions. One was to construct a bomb. One was to authorize the dropping of that bomb on a house that they knew had children in it. And they dropped the bomb in a place where they knew there was a 5-gallon can of gasoline. And then that was compounded by another despicable decision to let the fire burn, to use the fire as a tactical weapon to get the move people out of that house, only to have people who were attempting to flee return to that burning structure because they encountered gunfire that allegedly came from police. So the fact that city council finally got around to making a public apology is quite unusual. There's been a series of incidents in Philadelphia where city council never apologized for it. In May of 1838, there was a facility a brand new building that had just been built by abolitionists, people who were opposed to slavery, in a mob burned the place to the ground. And the reaction from the city, the official sources, there was an investigation, and they placed the blame on the abolitionists. That they said, well, people didn't like the fact that people were opposing slavery, and that blacks and whites were able to walk down the street together, and that outraged people. And so that was that was excused. But let's understand the timeline. City Council commendably, um, what was it, maybe 3 years ago, passed this apology. The year before that, there was an effort to effectuate some kind of apology, and the then mayor of the city, a guy named Jim Kenney, opposed it. And a year later, City Council made that apology, and that apology also contained the language that they, I guess, reapproved recently, saying that May 13th should be a day of remembrance and reflection. But prior to that, maybe 4 or 5 years prior to that, there was the erection of a historic marker that was placed on Cobbs Creek Parkway, recognizing May 13th, 1985, for the historic and horrific event that happened there. How did that historic marker get there? Well, it wasn't from city council. It wasn't from the civic community. It wasn't from the business community or the political community. It was the result of actions by a group of charter school, middle school kids in West Philadelphia. They had been assigned by their teacher to look at the issue of police brutality in West Philadelphia. And these young students discovered the move bombing. And they were outraged by the fact that 5 children died. 5 children were murdered in this incident, and nobody seemed to care. So it was their effort, their campaign that got this historic marker. They did something that shamefully adults had not done in what, 30 or 35 years, or, or just to say for decades. And then city council finally stepped forward and did something through the efforts, and we have to, give credit where credit's due. Councilwoman Gautier, who represents West Philadelphia, took that initiative to say, "Hey, wait a minute, we have to finally do something and recognize this event."
Now, it's funny that you bring up the marker, because I covered the press conference where the young people from the charter school came and put the marker and unveiled the marker.
Mhm.
For a while, there was a dispute about where the marker itself should go, whether it should be on Cobbs Creek Parkway or whether it should be in front of the house where it happened, like just about every historical marker in the city is.
Right.
To me, that speaks to the relationship that Philadelphia has with the history and who tells the story of MOVE. Because it's one of those stories that I call it a third rail, meaning that if you touch it, you're going to end up electrocuted no matter what.
Right.
But how do I guess, why is that still the case? Because, it's not like everybody doesn't know exactly what happened here. Why can't we still discuss this in a way that talks about the totality of it without, almost causing a riot?
Mhm. That is a very good question, and it raises some issues that Philadelphians and Americans, just like to forget. We had this incident. Nobody wants to like really deal with it in its totality. In some ways, I can understand the now residents of Osage Avenue not wanting that marker on there, as if nobody knows that 6221 was where this thing took place. Putting it on Cobbs Creek Parkway, I think, is a good compromise. But again, it kind of like puts blinders on it, because the historic marker or no historic marker, people are still going to be coming back to Osage Avenue wanting to see what happened and where it happened, and they're going to be stopping in front of 6221. I've been there a couple of times with news reporters from France and other places who were there to do a story on this, France, Canada, England. And I remember at one time, we were standing in front of the 6221 and talking, and from behind the closed door, you heard this, could you please get in front of, leave from in front of the house, show some respect for the house. And yeah, you agree to it. But the neighbors want some form of, I guess, stability. They don't want people coming. But the fact is that that happened there. But again, the fact that they don't want it in a certain place. I mean, there's a lot of historic markers that have been vandalized because certain people don't want the recognition that happened. I'm thinking of one of a guy named Sam Francis. He was the cook, the official, chef for George Washington. And George Washington actually asked him to come from New York City, where he had a tavern down in the Wall Street area. Well, Sam Francis was a black man. But to this day, there's some discussion of whether he was a black man or whether he was a swarthy skinned white man from the Caribbean. He was a black dude. They called him Black Sam. Come on, but that marker has been vandalized and moved. Some people don't want it in Society Hill, but that's where the guy's residence was. So what we see going on, what went on Osage Avenue is not that unusual in terms of this. Well, we want to be a city of history, but there's certain history that we really don't want to recognize, or at least.
Now, I went during the council meeting where they passed a resolution commemorating the 40th anniversary of the move bombing. Michael Africa was there,
Mhm.
and he has apparently bought 6221 Osage and is hoping that the city will help him, put some money toward paying it off, something
Mhm.
I doubt. But he also brought up the fact that as a condition of buying the house, he was not allowed to put any commemoration of what happened there. That's weird, don't you think?
Yeah, that's weird. In terms of a deed restriction through a mortgage, that is kind of weird. You know, um, you can't paint your house pink, or you have to pay the water bill. That's not your bill, but it was from the previous owner. You can understand that, but to put that kind of stipulation in is quite unusual. But the reality is that after the mortgage is settled, after it's paid off, um, the owner, now Mike Africa, can do what he wants to do with it. So yes, that is weird. And there's two things. One, the city, the city didn't operate in a fair manner with that particular property. The property was owned by a woman named Louise James. She was a sister of John Africa, and yes, she was an active member of the organization. But for the longest time that she owned that house since 1958. Well, she purchased it and paid it off. That was her retreat. So whatever was going on with Move, she didn't bring that on to Osage Avenue. And in the year before May 13th, 1985, Move, her brother and her son had ejected her from the house. So it wasn't that she was there, authorizing Move to, act the way they did in terms of terrorizing their neighbors. So there should have been a little more consideration for her. In the aftermath of the destruction of the whole 6200 block of Osage Avenue, the city actually sent her a bill for the demolition of her house, for just tearing down the walls of the house that they burned down. And then they gave her a settlement. I think they said, well, we're going to give you $20,000 for the house. She never cashed the check. She said, I want my house back. When the houses were initially built back in very poor condition, that, subsequently a lot of people had to move because of serious code violations, they would not return the property to her, although it was her house. And for over a decade or more, that house or that property was served as a police mini station. It was a mini station in that one officer was assigned to sit in that house all day long for years and years and years. So it wasn't like police cars were coming in and out of there. Mike Africa Jr., who is the grand nephew of yeah, that would be the grandnephew of John Africa, wants the property back in the possession of Move because he said that he had promised his aunt that to get her house back. On her deathbed, she said, "I just want my house back." And that's what he wants to do. And part of his thinking, I mean, one, he's trying to do a GoFundMe to raise money to help pay off this mortgage, which is now in excess of $300,000. But he wants the city to pay some of it. The city, in this latest go round, where the houses were rebuilt and now sold at market rates of hundreds of thousands of dollars, they initially gave it to a developer, a series of houses on there for $1. And Mike Africa says that he went to the city when he heard that and said, "Since you're selling it for $1, I'll pay you $1 for the house." And they said, "No, you can't have it." So this is again some of this manifest unfairness that underlies this whole move conundrum. Mike Africa is totally different in terms of his actions and his attitudes than some of the move members from the 70s and 80s. And the city should have made some consideration to return that property to Louise James because she, at that point, was cooperating with the city and in many ways had given them the predicate to go in and serve the eviction because initially the city's posture is, well, we can't just get rid of somebody because the neighbors don't like it. Well, it was a little more than not liking it. Move was engaged in gross housing code violations that gave the city more than a predicate to go in and take care of it. For just one quick example, I mean, they cordoned off the driveway in the back. That was a clear violation. They should have been held to account for that. But the bottom line is that Louise Africa should have retain ownership of the house that she had paid for. But the city, again, just operating in a unfair way, said, "No, you can't get back in." And at that point, she was not. She didn't say, "Okay, well, we're just going to open this thing back up again and continue this effort to get the release of the jailed move members."
Now, I guess for my last question,
Mhm.
where is Move now? I mean, you hear different things about them. I mean, you kind of know they exist, but where is Move now? And is there more than one Move?
From my understanding, Move has somewhat splintered. There's the faction represented by Mike Africa Jr. His parents were two of the Move Nine. He was actually born in a jail cell in August of 1978 when that incident happened. His mom was pregnant, and a week or so, a couple of weeks after she was incarcerated for that incident, held for trial, he was born. And actually, the first few days of his life were lived in a prison cell in one of the Philadelphia prisons. Then there is a faction, if you want to call it that, of some of the original Move members, and particularly some of those who had been released from prison after 40 years. There's another faction of what we say perhaps second generation Move members, those who grew up in the organization. They've turned against the organization because they said that they were abused as children. They weren't allowed to read and write. They were cloistered. Some of them were married off as young as 12 and 13 years old. So yeah, the organization is splintered. There's still a belief in the efficacy and the propriety of John Africa's philosophies, but how those philosophies are to be implemented currently, there's a couple of strains of direction within the MOVE organization.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Lynn. We really appreciate you coming on. And in the interest of full disclosure, Lynn was my first editor at the Philadelphia Tribune, and he was one of Larry's professors at Temple in the MJ program. So we couldn't think of anybody we wanted to have on to talk about this than somebody that we respect as much as you.
Well,
So,
thank you.
so thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your interest. And, I have, as you know, I've expressed this eternal, respect for you because when I was your first editor, you came to me with a story about something called AIDS. And I said, wait a minute, you talk about friends that help you and AIDS? You said, no, it's this disease, this epidemic. And I see you as one of the first persons that really dealt in depth with that story. So that's a compliment to your news foresight. And of course, Larry was one of my students, but again, a great story. He wanted to cover city council and city government. I said, well, you may need to start hanging out in City Hall. And of his own volition, he did that. And now you got the hall monitor where you guys are doing a tremendous public service in providing information on city government to the citizens of the city of Philadelphia.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'd love to thank Lynn We want to thank Lynn Washington, the great Lynn Washington, who we both revere, and we're very grateful that he was able to join us. And now we're going to go to another Temple alum, Denise, Marco Serino of the Philadelphia Tribune. Marco, how are you tonight?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on. I apologize. Traffic took a little longer than expected, but it was great getting to listen to Lynn talk about his experiences and stuff. Lynn, of course, sat down with the Tribune and did a roundtable discussion of reporters who were at the scene on May 13th, 1985. OJ Spivey did a write-up for that. I had the task of doing trying to cover everything and sort of put everything in sort of a synopsis.
I'm sure that was real easy.
I was really concerned about making sure I got the tune right because one, I was like less than a year old when it happened. Two, I really didn't know as much about it until I read things about it. And yeah, you're right. And Denise, you're absolutely right. It's a third rail. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And yeah, it's still something the city's grappling with. When I talked to Mike Africa Monday for the piece, he acknowledged that there was a rift between him and Ramona. We saw at City Council how he wants to be able to do something about it. But again, it's in the middle of a set of row homes in Southwest Philadelphia. Cobb's Creek, I guess you consider it Southwest Philadelphia. My parents also grew up in Southwest Philadelphia, but they grew up in other sections of Southwest Philadelphia. So whether or not they consider it that is, up to interpretation. So,
yeah. Well, Marco, tell us a little bit about this DA's race. The primary is next week. The candidates are incumbent District Attorney Larry Krasner and the former municipal court judge. Tell us a little bit about where we are and what you think this is. The former Judge Patrick Dugan, excuse me for not mentioning his name. Tell us where we are with this race and what you're hearing about it.
So it looks like it is a more competitive challenge than 4 years ago with Carlos Vega. Pat Dugan has gone out. He has picked up about, by my last count, 28 endorsements from ward leaders. As of right now, has 29. There are a few big ones that are sitting out, still available. The 52nd, the 50th, the 34th. There's some big ones out in West and Northwest Philadelphia that are still on the board. Dugan's getting a lot of support from the Northeast, as Carlos Vega did. DA Krasner is doing better in South Philly, in Center City. Although the 8th ward is not going to endorse him, they're endorsing Dugan. A big group that's staying out of this time around is the FOP. They are not planning to endorse anyone, which is not a backhanded endorsement of Krasner or a slight to Dugan. I think they're just staying out of it right now.
What are some of the key issues in this race?
I think the biggest question has been, the decrease in crime. When Krasner stood for election in 2021, homicides reached an all-time high. I have to remember homicides and murders are two very different things, but homicides peaked after the pandemic. Now, the rate of homicides in Philadelphia went up more than the national average, both in 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic, of which that was considered the cause. Now the shootings are down substantially. Last year, the homicide number was less than 50% of where it was from the peak. And DA Krasner is saying, hey, I have a big part with this. He's credited having, new partners. He took a backhanded jab at Mayor Kenney for what he claimed was sort of, limiting what other police chiefs could do, while complimenting his current partners, Mayor Sherrell Parker and Police Commissioner Kevin Bethel. So Krasner's trying to talk about what he has been doing, focusing on technology, focusing on, trying to do more and change procedures. He made a really interesting discussion with us. He said because he's not prosecuting prostitution or focusing on lower level crimes, particularly merit obsession, they can then take those resources and put it towards other things. Pat Dugan, who sat on the bench for over 20 years and was president judge from 2019 to 2024, and sat in some of those meetings with Mr. Krasner as DA, said that Krasner, isn't really, that his efforts to move away from diversionary programs is actually hurting the city. Many diversionary programs, Pat Dugan helped put it himself. The Dawn's Court, Veterans Court, other options to help people. Both are fairly similar, I'd say, in approach to things. Both you wouldn't think a guy who's been on the bench that long is so isn't so impressed by the success of diversionary and less punitive measures, but because Dugan has seen the success of it, he's bought in.
Now, I guess my question, and it's a question that comes up, whenever we have what I call the criminal justice races, like the judge and the district attorney, is what are you hearing from the commissioner's office regarding turnout? Or, have people been, opting to go with the mail-in ballot? Have they talked about turnout at all? Because, most of the time, this particular race, if it gets 29% turnout, that's a big election.
If they get 29% turnout, that'll be a 50% increase from, I think, what we saw in 2021, and whoever's responsible for that should get a statue in front of the municipal building. The commissioner's office is pushing for people to use mail-in ballots and to use local drop boxes. And now that there are councilmanic district offices within each, in the neighborhoods, you can also use that. We haven't heard really a lot out of turnout. Usually this is a race that's 15 to 20%. By the numbers, about 500,000 people more voted for president in 2024 in the November election than voted in DA's general election in 2021, in which DA Krasner did have a Republican challenger. This time around, he will likely not. Now, there has been discussion from the Philadelphia Republicans that they will do a write-in ballot on Tuesday because they cannot vote in the primary as it is closed, and write in Pat Dugan as their candidate to run in the general, of which Dugan's campaign has said he does not support. He does not want to go that route. He's a lifelong Democrat. I don't even know how you do that. It's like it seems very specious and really some shenanigans involved. So I don't know if it would endure a legal challenge, or if Dugan would just be like, no, I'm out. I lost fair and square if that happens. So I would expect, another low turnout race. I think the big thing is going to be where the voters turn out. And some of the higher turnout wards have already endorsed Dugan. So if he can get people to come out in the Northeast and he can get people to come out in those wards he has earned support for in West Philly and Northwest Philly, he's going to have, certainly a chance. I saw the 37 point margin in the poll last month. I don't think it's going to be that close. If that's the line, I'll bet a half a paycheck on the under. I'll take with Duke in the end. I'll take a plus 36.5 any day of the week on a race like this.
Well, the primary is next Tuesday, May 20th. Polls open at 7 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. You have all day to go. We recommend you do. We hope you do, no matter who you vote for. It's an important day, and it's an important office. Very important office, especially now. Marcus Serino, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and we'll have you on again real soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate it. And yes, go vote in these races because they actually matter in your lives. But if you're watching this show, then you probably realized it already.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Marco. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, team. Take care.
Now we're going to play an interview we did earlier this week with Sean Mooring, who is of the Lenfest Institute and who is one of the leaders of the Every Vote, Every Voice movement, which we are a part, Denise. Mm-hmm. We receive funding from them. So here is our interview with Sean Mooring to talk about a very important survey they're doing. All right, Sean.
Okay.
Seem to be having a little difficulty here. Mm-hmm. I assure you, we did this interview earlier this week.
Yes,
Denise.
we did. We did.
And, one of the things about Every Voice, Every Vote and the Lenfest Institute is they provide funding for news organizations like ours, mm-hmm. which has. So what we're going to do, Denise? We're going to switch things up a little bit.
Okay.
We're going to change the order of the show. We're calling an audible. We're going to bring in Lance Haver to tell us a little bit about SEPTA. Yep. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. Thank you very much. It is a very important election, and it's very important that we get the message out that even if you are registered nonpartisan, there are ballot questions, and there is also the city controller's race. And one of the things that will be interesting will be to see what the Working Family Party does in the general election. But I'm here to talk about SEPTA, and I think that most of us now know SEPTA is trying to hold its riders hostage. It is saying publicly on its webpage, if you ride the buses like I do, you have seen the ads on their screens. Help SEPTA. Make sure SEPTA gets the money it needs. Here's what SEPTA is saying. The state isn't giving them the money they need. And last year they budgeted for the money they thought they were going to need. And then they didn't get it until the governor at the last minute came in and flexed the money. So this year they're going to try another approach. They're not going to come up with a budget that assumes that the state's going to come through with the money. Instead, what they're going to do is project fare increases up to 25%, across the board service reductions as much as 40%, eliminate 50 bus routes, eliminate 6 train lines, and really do away with public transit as we know it. And it's really a very different tactic than what they've done in the past. So what they're saying is to the legislators, look, if you don't fund SEPTA, don't worry about it because we'll just take it out of the riders. And one of the things that we should remember is the SEPTA board is controlled by the suburbanites and controlled by the Republican interests. And so in the past, when SEPTA was being run, the SEPTA board was still controlled by the Republican interests, but the SEPTA management held their feet to the fire. This year, for the first time, what SEPTA is saying to the Republicans who control the state Senate, don't worry about it because we're not going to put the onus on you. We're not going to say you're responsible. We, SEPTA, are going to go ahead and make sure that the riders know that the SEPTA is going to cut the service. And it's really doing it without need. So I'd like to call up the first slide because one of the things that's really amazing about this proposal is the first attack by SEPTA is against the City Transit Division. And I want to be very clear about this. They have two distinct proposals. The first one is the 20% service cut and the fare increase. The service cuts are to the buses and not to the regional rail lines. That's going to happen starting August 24th. And then after those cuts go through and the fare increases go through, they're going to give the Republicans in Harrisburg until the 1st of next year to come up with money. And then, only then, if they don't, are they going to cut the regional rail lines. And why this makes absolutely no sense is for three reasons. First of all, SEPTA has the money it needs to keep operating. Second, the real cost savings isn't in the buses. If you eliminate the buses, you're not going to save as much money as if you eliminate the trains. Scott Sauer, who's the acting general manager of SEPTA, went on WHYY and admitted that. He said, clearly, we still have to pay for the infrastructure for the buses, the bus routes, the bus, all of that. But when it comes to the trains, we're paying Amtrak to maintain the train lines. So all we have to do is not pay them and we'll save $60 million. So the real savings isn't projected for the first cuts. It's projected afterwards. So again, here's what the SEPTA controlled by the Republican board is saying. First thing we're going to do is harm the city transit division. We're going to cut the buses. We're going to raise the fares. And then we're going to give you a chance to come up with some money so we don't have to hurt the suburban rail lines. Now, I think most of that is well known. What's not known is that SEPTA doesn't need to do anything. They have plenty of money. We can just call up the next slide. I see I have control of it. Again, SEPTA has over $500 million in cash. $500 million. Now, it's really hard to find it in their operating budget. They bury it. They don't make it easy. But it's called, they no longer call it the Fare Stabilization Fund. They changed the word to the Service Stabilization Fund. But as of June 30th of 2024, they have $565 million in it. And that money's available so they don't have to cut the service. They don't have to raise the fares. Now, SEPTA might suggest, well, they needed to use it last year, but that's not true. SEPTA got all the money it needed last year to have a balanced budget. In the first round, they got $47 million from the state legislature. Then Governor Shapiro flexed, which means take highway dollars and use it for public transit, another $153 million. They raised the fares, $14.4 million. The surrounding counties contributed another $8 million. They raised the parking fees, so they got another $4 million. They cut the unnecessary consultants, and they didn't fill all the positions, so they saved another $27 million. The total to SEPTA from last year, from the flexing the money, the fare increases, the cutting the buses, doing all those things, was $253 million, more than enough to close last year's operating deficit. And it's not what I say. Again, if people take the time to go beyond SEPTA's press releases and actually read what's in the operating budget, this comes directly from the operating budget. You can see that SEPTA had a surplus last year. Now, this is in thousands of dollars, so it's not a lot. But last year, they had over $1.3 million in surplus last year. So they didn't have to touch that $500 million surplus. That's still sitting there, right there in the bank. SEPTA could use it tomorrow so that they don't have to go through with this doomsday approach. I'm going to just say one more time, here's what SEPTA is trying to do. They are saying to the state legislator, we're not going to put the responsibility of the SEPTA's demise on you. We're going to take responsibility of it ourselves. We're going to go ahead and cut the service and raise the fares. And then if you don't come through, it's not going to look like you did it. It's going to look like SEPTA did it. So I encourage people to come out to the hearings. Let's run the system with the cash we have. Even if you want to call it a rainy day fund, if you're talking about eliminating 50 bus routes, raising fares by 21%, doing away with any service after 9 o'clock at night, doing away with the Phillies subway and the Eagle subway, special event subways, I'd say it's raining pretty hard, and it's a good time to use that money.
All right, Lance, thanks so much. And here's our interview with Sean Mooring. All right, Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into this, tell us who you are and what you do.
So my name is, as you said, Sean Mooring. I am the head of Philadelphia programs for the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. So I oversee all of our grant making and programming that's based in the Philadelphia media and news ecosystem.
Okay. So one of the many things that the Lenfest Institute does is it talks to people about what they want to see and what's going on in the news and what their opinions are. Can you tell us a little bit about the project that is debuting this week?
Yeah, so Every Voice, Every Vote is a initiative that's been going on in Philadelphia since the run-up for the mayoral election. So when that initiative hit, we launched Every Voice, Every Vote as an effort to work with media organizations and community organizations as trusted messengers to really refocus the election cycle on issues that mattered most to Philadelphians, and to make sure that our public officials are, being responsive to the issues that matter. And so back when we initially launched, we did a public opinion poll in partnership with the Pew Charitable Trust, where folks did a survey and, to identify what issues mattered most to them and what the candidates should be focused on. And through Every Voice, Every Vote, we have over 70 community and media partners throughout the city of Philadelphia. And our goal was always to make sure that, West Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, Center City, all of the neighborhoods. Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods. And so making sure that all of the voices from each of those communities have equal opportunity to weigh in on the issues that matter. And so we just recently launched a follow-up survey. We initially held a series of focus groups. We did 8 focus groups across the city of Philadelphia, where we talked to about 67 individuals about the issues that matter most to them. And then just last week, we launched an online opinion poll where we're inviting the community to log on and weigh in. So we have some of the results from the focus groups that are there, as well as an opportunity for people to, speak about whether or not what's been shared in the focus groups. The focus groups highlight issues around public safety, education, and cleaner and greener initiatives that have been launched by the Parker administration. So we are asking whether or not what the findings from the focus groups, does that resonate with folks? What additional ideas or opportunities to weigh in, as well as getting an understanding
we're playing an interview.
what the civic engagement mean to them, and then where are they getting news and information? What are their trusted sources of news and information?
So what kind of things did you hear from the focus groups?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. Definitely people are paying attention, right? So they are identifying some of the initiatives that have been launched around Kensington. They've spoke about some of the efforts that are happening in the schools around extended school days and extending the school year. And one of the things that was evident through the initial findings of the focus groups is that they want to see more of the mayor. They felt like she was very present and in community leading up to the election, and would like to see her also out in communities and engaging and talking to folks now that she's in office. There was a fair amount of appreciation for the work that is being done and is continuing to be done, but there is a desire for to see more, to see the efforts continue and to be engaged. They want to, it was really clear that folks want to, feel as though they can have a direct line or really have an impact, and let their voices be heard.
Now we're almost a year and a half into her term. Are people satisfied with some of the things that we talked about, the clean and green, crime reduction, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that overall it was positive. We didn't see a lot of, folks that, were down on the administration, but there was, and again, really specific around some of the initiatives where, some places felt as though, they would still like to see, more consistent cleaning up of some of the lots. They want to see more consistent efforts around, some of the safety initiatives. And definitely when it comes to our public schools, folks want to make sure that, the investment is being made, investment in teachers, investment in fixing up these buildings. One of the things that was highlighted, people noting the donation of air conditioners by Jalen Hurts, right? But and it's great that he did that, but wouldn't it be nice if the administration was able to take care and make conditions more conducive for learning for our young people?
How important is this kind of outreach when we're dealing with a decline, in legacy media, the ability of legacy media, the rise of sort of the hyper local outlets? Hopefully that continues. Why is this so important? How important is it to make sure that people understand what they're actually reading, and that this information is coming from a valid source?
Absolutely. And so, again, with the rise of misinformation and disinformation, one of the things that we at LenFest have really put an effort more broadly beyond even just every voice, every vote, is, how do we ensure that as people are going to platforms like TikTok or Instagram or any of those, or YouTube, right? How do we ensure that there are really strong and capable news organizations that are providing information that people can rely on? And so we're so excited to have folks like you all at the Hall Monitor out there engaging and making sure that you're providing that information, because people, what we saw from the focus groups and what we're beginning to see through the Philly Pulse poll is that people are really they want to know more. They want to make sure that they can allow their voices to be heard and be informed about what's going on. And so, we are investing in news organizations, in folks really thinking innovatively about how to best show up and participate in these platforms and put reliable and solid information out there. Because I think as you all build relationships with your audience and expand your audience, it creates an opportunity for them to get that really credible and solid information that they desire.
All right, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia.
Yes, thank you for joining us, Sean. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I guess my question kind of focuses on public safety. Was there anything on that particular topic that stood out to you that you got from the people that were participated in the focus group? And did it mention at all, all of the people that are involved in public safety, like Commissioner Bethel and the district attorney and stuff? Did any of that come up?
Yeah, so definitely, a lot of what came up around public safety, of course, the focus on Kensington as, a major effort or initiative that's coming out of the current administration. There was mention of that. and a lot of discussion around that. But also, the need to have, more police on the streets, and, that people are building relationships. There were some, suggestions around community policing, and how do you ensure that, people, you're not just putting police on the streets, but that, there are relationships built in these communities. And I think that's something that's really neat about the public opinion poll, and what we're calling Philly Pulse Poll. And people can access it at phillypulsepoll.com. And when you go on there, you'll see some of the feedback and quotes from people who were participating in the focus groups. And when you go on there, you'll see, an opportunity to weigh in on the clean and green initiatives, public safety, and education. But getting back to your question, I think that, issues around the district attorney's race was also something that was really prominent, in terms of how, one, the lack of exposure, right? That there hadn't been any televised debates. And my colleague Jared Council did a piece on that just last Friday, talking about, that as we began chatting with several of our EV partners, noting that there were just a slew of cancellations on both sides, and wanting to ensure that, noting that there needs to be opportunities for folks to hear from and see, because, television is still, even as we talk about the social media platforms, television is still the most watched or accessible place where people get their news and information. And so the importance of that, and not having a televised debate, really puts the public, in a bad light, because they're not getting the exposure to the issues and understanding of the candidates' positions the way that they would otherwise.
Now, traditionally, this particular primary, what I refer to as the criminal justice primary, is one of those low turnout elections.
Yes.
Last year, 4 years ago, I think it was maybe 29% of the electorate that even bothered to come out and vote for judges and the district attorney and all these people who could decide whether or not what you did is considered a misdemeanor and you get off with like a slap on the wrist, or whether what you did is considered a felony and you're looking at serious time.
Right.
Do you think that the fact that there hasn't been a televised debate is going to make the turnout problem worse?
Well, I definitely won't help it. I think that, and through every voice, every vote, I've always stated that, what we're about is making sure that people have access to the information that they need to make informed decisions, right? We would love for turnout to, to also, increase throughout this process. But I think, there's so many factors that go into turnout, whether or not folks are familiar with the weather's like, all of the things, right? Accessibility of the polls, understanding, how things change, whether their poll places change or things like that. But I definitely feel like not having a televised debate is something that, will limit people's access, right?
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We'd like to thank Sean Mooring for being with us. That will be in our newsletter on our website so people can see the rest of it. There wasn't too much more. We'd like to thank the great Lynn Washington for being with us, and Marco Serino from the Tribune, and Lance Haver, as always. We'll be back next week on Hall Monitor.